The roar of the crowd echoed through the streets of Miami as confetti rained down from the balconies of downtown buildings. January 22, 1989, would be remembered as the night the Cincinnati Bengals and San Francisco 49ers battled in one of the most thrilling Super Bowl finals in history. But for the Miami Fire Department, this night would mark the beginning of a mystery that would haunt them for decades. Ethan Miller adjusted his radio as he stepped out of Engine Company 12, the crisp evening air carrying the distant sounds of celebration from Joe Robbie Stadium. At 34, Ethan was one of the most respected firefighters in Miami-Dade County, known for his unwavering dedication and calm demeanor under pressure. His colleagues often joked that he could find his way through smoke-filled buildings with his eyes closed, a skill that had saved countless lives over his 12-year career. The station had been unusually quiet during the day shift, with most emergency calls related to minor incidents caused by the massive influx of tourists and football fans. Ethan had spent the afternoon conducting equipment checks and reviewing emergency protocols with the newer recruits, always emphasizing the importance of thorough preparation and attention to detail. "Miller, you sure you don't want to catch the game with us?" called out Captain Rodriguez from the station doorway. The captain held a cold beer in his hand, and through the open door, Ethan could see several off-duty firefighters gathered around the small television in the common room. The game was entering its final quarter, and the excitement was palpable even from a distance. Ethan shook his head with a slight smile. "Thanks, Cap, but I promised Sarah I'd pick up some groceries on the way home. You know how she gets when I'm late for dinner." The truth was more complicated than Ethan let on. For the past 3 weeks, he had been receiving strange phone calls at the station. The caller never spoke, just breathed heavily into the receiver before hanging up. At first, Ethan had dismissed them as pranks, possibly from teenagers with too much time on their hands. But something about the timing felt deliberate, almost threatening. The calls always came during his shift, suggesting that someone was monitoring his schedule. Tonight the calls had stopped, and that silence worried him more than the harassment itself. Sarah, his girlfriend of 2 years, had noticed his increased anxiety, but attributed it to work stress. Ethan hadn't told her about the calls, not wanting to worry her unnecessarily. She worked as a nurse at Jackson Memorial Hospital and had enough stress in her own life without adding his paranoid concerns to the mix. As Ethan climbed into his personal vehicle, a weathered blue pickup truck that had seen better days, he noticed a dark sedan parked across the street. The car had been there when his shift started 8 hours ago, and the same figure sat motionless behind the wheel. The vehicle was positioned perfectly to observe the fire station's main entrance, and Ethan's training kicked in as he made a mental note of the license plate before starting his engine. The drive through Miami's streets should have taken 20 minutes, but Ethan found himself taking a longer route, checking his rearview mirror frequently. The dark sedan followed at a distance, maintaining just enough space to avoid suspicion while keeping Ethan's truck in sight. The driver was skilled, occasionally allowing other vehicles to come between them, but never losing track of their target. Ethan's heart rate increased as he realized this wasn't paranoia. Someone was definitely following him. His mind raced through possible explanations. Had he made enemies during his years of service? Was this related to a recent rescue where he might have inadvertently witnessed something he shouldn't have? The questions multiplied, but no clear answers emerged. Instead of heading home to his small apartment in Coral Gables, Ethan decided to drive to the grocery store as he had originally planned. Perhaps in a public place, whoever was following him would reveal their intentions or simply give up. The Publix on Miracle Mile was busy despite the late hour, filled with Super Bowl partygoers grabbing last-minute snacks and beverages. The parking lot was well lit and crowded, providing a sense of security that Ethan desperately needed. He parked near the front entrance and sat in his truck for a moment, watching the dark sedan pull into a spot 3 rows away. The driver remained inside, and from this distance, Ethan couldn't make out any distinguishing features. The person appeared to be wearing a baseball cap, pulled low over their face, and their posture suggested they were prepared to wait as long as necessary. Inside the store, Ethan moved through the aisles mechanically, his mind racing as he tried to piece together who might want to follow him and why. His work at the fire department was straightforward. He responded to emergencies, saved lives, and went home. He had no outstanding debts, no involvement in anything that could be considered controversial, and no known enemies from his personal life. The fluorescent lights seemed brighter than usual, and every sound felt amplified. Ethan found himself studying the faces of other shoppers, wondering if any of them might be connected to his mysterious stalker. A mother with 2 young children argued about cereal choices. An elderly man carefully compared prices on different brands of coffee. Everything seemed normal, yet Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. As he reached for a carton of milk, Ethan felt a presence behind him. He turned to find a middle-aged woman with graying hair and worried eyes standing nearby. She seemed to be studying him intently, as if trying to decide whether to approach. Her hands clutched a small purse, and her posture suggested both determination and fear. "Excuse me," she said quietly, glancing around nervously. "Are you Ethan Miller from the fire department?" Ethan nodded cautiously, his training telling him to remain alert while appearing calm. "Yes, ma'am. Is there something I can help you with?" The woman stepped closer, lowering her voice even further. Her eyes darted toward the store's entrance before focusing back on Ethan. "My name is Margaret Thompson. I think someone is trying to hurt you, and I know why." The fluorescent lights of the grocery store seemed to flicker more intensely as Margaret Thompson's words hung in the air between them. Ethan set down the milk carton and studied the woman's face, searching for any sign of deception or mental instability. Her eyes were clear and focused, but her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a small purse. The worry lines around her eyes suggested someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for quite some time. "Mrs. Thompson, I think we should talk somewhere more private," Ethan said, glancing around at the other shoppers who seemed oblivious to their conversation. "There's a coffee shop next door that should be quieter." Margaret nodded quickly, relief washing over her features. "Yes, that would be better, but we need to be careful. They might be watching." Her voice carried the weight of genuine fear, and Ethan noticed how she kept checking the store's exits as they spoke. As they made their way toward the exit, Ethan caught sight of the dark sedan still parked in the lot. The driver appeared to be talking on a phone, occasionally looking in their direction. The sight confirmed Ethan's suspicions that this encounter was not coincidental. He guided Margaret toward the coffee shop through a side entrance, hoping to avoid being seen by whoever was monitoring his movements. The coffee shop was nearly empty, with only a teenage employee behind the counter reading a magazine and an elderly man in the corner absorbed in his newspaper. The warm aroma of freshly brewed coffee provided a stark contrast to the tension that filled the air. Ethan chose a table near the back, positioning himself so he could watch both the front door and the windows facing the parking lot. "Mrs. Thompson, you said someone is trying to hurt me. What makes you think that?" Ethan asked, keeping his voice low and calm while maintaining the authoritative tone he used during emergency situations. Margaret's hands shook as she opened her purse and pulled out a manila envelope that had clearly been handled many times. The edges were worn, and Ethan could see that it contained a substantial amount of material. 3 months ago, my son Danny was killed in what the police called a car accident, but I know it wasn't an accident. Someone forced his car off the road on the Palmetto Expressway. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine as memories of that night came flooding back. He remembered that accident vividly. His unit had been one of the first to respond to the call. The scene had been devastating. A young man's car had gone through the guardrail and plunged into a canal. Despite their best efforts, working in challenging conditions with limited visibility, they hadn't been able to save him. The victim had been trapped underwater for too long before they could extract him from the submerged vehicle. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Thompson. I was there that night. We did everything we could," Ethan said gently, the weight of that failed rescue still heavy on his conscience. "I know you did," Margaret replied, tears forming in her eyes. "That's why they're after you now." Danny had been investigating something big. He was a journalist for the Miami Herald, working on a story about corruption in the city government. He told me he had evidence that could bring down some very powerful people. She opened the envelope and pulled out several photographs and documents, spreading them carefully on the small table. "Danny gave me these for safekeeping 2 weeks before he died. He said if anything happened to him, I should find someone I could trust and give them this information. He was scared, Mr. Miller. My son was never scared of anything, but in those final weeks, he barely slept." Ethan examined the photographs, which showed what appeared to be clandestine meetings between city officials and men in expensive suits. The images were taken from a distance, suggesting surveillance work, and the quality indicated they had been shot with professional equipment. The documents contained financial records, bank statements showing suspicious transfers, and what looked like construction contracts for projects throughout Miami-Dade County that seemed to have inflated costs and questionable specifications. "Mrs. Thompson, why are you giving this to me? Why not go to the police or the FBI?" Ethan asked, though he was beginning to understand the complexity of the situation. Margaret's expression hardened, and her voice took on a bitter edge. "Because some of the people in these photographs are police officers, high-ranking ones. Danny didn't know who he could trust, and neither do I. He spent months trying to figure out how deep this corruption went, and every time he thought he found someone clean, that person would either disappear from the investigation or suddenly become uncooperative." She pulled out another photograph, this one showing a police captain Ethan recognized from department meetings. "Danny didn't know who he could trust, but he mentioned you specifically. He said you were one of the good ones, someone who couldn't be bought." Ethan felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a heavy coat. "When did Danny mention me?" "The last time I spoke with him 3 days before the accident. He said he had met you at a fire scene a few months earlier, and you had gone out of your way to help an elderly woman whose apartment had been damaged. He was impressed by your character, said you spent your own money to help her find temporary housing when the city services failed her." The memory came back to Ethan clearly now. It had been a small kitchen fire in Little Havana, and the elderly Cuban woman had been left homeless with nowhere to go. Ethan had indeed helped her find a place to stay, and had even driven her there after his shift ended. He hadn't realized anyone had been watching or taking note of his actions. As Margaret spoke, Ethan noticed movement outside the coffee shop window. The dark sedan had moved closer, and he could now see 2 figures inside instead of one. Both appeared to be watching the coffee shop intently. His instincts told him they needed to leave immediately. "Mrs. Thompson, we need to go now," Ethan said, standing up and gathering the documents. "Is there somewhere safe you can stay tonight? Somewhere these people wouldn't think to look for you? I have a sister in Fort Lauderdale." "I could go there," Margaret replied, fear creeping back into her voice as she noticed Ethan's urgency. "Good. Take these documents with you and don't tell anyone where you're going. I'll contact you in a few days once I've had a chance to study this information and figure out our next move." Ethan handed her a business card with his personal phone number written on the back. As they prepared to leave through the back exit, Ethan's mind raced with the implications of what he had just learned. If Margaret was right, and her son had been murdered for investigating corruption, then Ethan was now in possession of evidence that could put his own life in danger. The people responsible had already demonstrated their willingness to kill to protect their secrets. The back alley behind the coffee shop was dimly lit, with dumpsters and delivery trucks creating shadows that could hide potential threats. Ethan walked Margaret to her car, a small Honda parked 2 blocks away, constantly checking for signs they were being followed. The streets were busier now as Super Bowl parties were winding down, providing some cover for their movement. "Be careful, Mr. Miller," Margaret said as she got into her car. "These people have already killed once. They won't hesitate to do it again. Danny always said that the truth has a way of coming out, but sometimes good people have to die before that happens." As Margaret drove away, Ethan realized he was now alone with knowledge that powerful people would kill to keep secret. The Super Bowl celebration continued in the distance, but for Ethan, the game had taken on an entirely different meaning. He was no longer just a firefighter responding to emergencies. He had become a target in a deadly game of corruption and cover-up. The drive back to his apartment felt like the longest 20 minutes of Ethan's life. Every car that appeared in his rearview mirror seemed suspicious. Every shadow on the street corner could be hiding a threat. He had taken a circuitous route through residential neighborhoods, doubling back several times to ensure he wasn't being followed, but the paranoia continued to gnaw at him. The streets of Coral Gables were quieter now, with most residents either asleep or gathered around televisions, watching post-game coverage. Ethan's apartment was a modest 1-bedroom unit on the 2nd floor of a converted house, chosen specifically for its quiet neighborhood and the elderly landlord who kept a watchful eye on the property. As he climbed the exterior stairs, Ethan noticed that the light bulb above his door had been broken, leaving the landing in darkness. Glass fragments crunched under his feet, and he could see that the bulb hadn't simply burned out. It had been deliberately shattered. His hand instinctively moved to his keychain, where he kept a small flashlight, a habit developed from years of emergency response work. The beam of light revealed that his door was slightly ajar, though he was certain he had locked it securely before leaving for work that morning. The deadbolt appeared to have been picked, rather than forced, suggesting professional work. Ethan's training kicked in, and he carefully pushed the door open while staying to one side, listening for any sounds from within. The apartment had been thoroughly and systematically searched. Furniture was overturned, drawers pulled out, and papers scattered across the floor. Whoever had done this had been methodical and professional, but they hadn't been concerned about hiding their presence. Books had been pulled from shelves, cushions slashed open, and even the contents of his refrigerator had been examined. Ethan moved carefully through each room, checking for intruders and assessing the damage. His bedroom had received the most attention. The mattress had been flipped and cut open, revealing the springs and stuffing inside. Even the contents of his closet had been dumped onto the floor, with every pocket of every piece of clothing turned inside out. In the kitchen, every cabinet had been opened and searched, with dishes and food items scattered across the counters. The bathroom hadn't been spared either. The medicine cabinet had been emptied, and even the toilet tank had been opened and searched. The level of thoroughness suggested that the intruders had been looking for something specific and had plenty of time to conduct their search. As he surveyed the destruction, Ethan realized that the intruders had been looking for the same documents that Margaret Thompson had given him. Somehow, they knew about Danny's investigation and believed Ethan might have the evidence. The fact that they had broken into his apartment meant they were desperate and running out of time to contain the situation. Ethan's phone rang, startling him in the silence of his ransacked home. The caller ID showed his fire station's number, which was unusual for this time of night, unless there was a major emergency requiring all hands. "Miller here," he answered cautiously. "Ethan, it's Captain Rodriguez. We just got a call about a structure fire at 1247 Biscayne Boulevard. The caller specifically requested you by name, said it was urgent, and that lives were in danger. I know you're off duty, but given the specific request, I thought you should know." Something about the call felt wrong to Ethan. Structure fires were typically handled by the closest available unit, and it was highly unusual for someone to request a specific firefighter, especially one who was off duty. The timing, coming so soon after his apartment had been searched, seemed far too coincidental. "Cap, did the caller identify themselves? Did they say why they needed me specifically?" "Negative. The call came in about 5 minutes ago, and the caller hung up after giving the address and asking for you. But Ethan, there's something else. I just tried calling your apartment to reach you, and your phone went straight to the answering machine. Where are you calling from?" Ethan looked around his destroyed apartment and made a quick decision. He couldn't tell his captain about the break-in without explaining the entire situation, which would put more people at risk. "I'm at home, but I'll head to the scene right away. Cap, do me a favor and send backup units as well. Something doesn't feel right about this call." "Already done. Engine 7 and Ladder 3 are en route. Be careful out there, Miller. And Ethan, if something's going on that I should know about, don't try to handle it alone." As Ethan hung up the phone, he realized he was being drawn into a trap. The people who had searched his apartment were now trying to lure him to a specific location, probably to eliminate him as a threat. But he also knew that if there really was a fire and people were in danger, he couldn't ignore the call. His oath as a firefighter compelled him to respond, even if it meant walking into danger. Ethan quickly gathered a few essential items: his backup radio, a powerful flashlight, and the spare set of turnout gear he kept at home for emergencies. He also grabbed a small camera from his desk drawer, thinking it might be useful to document whatever he found at the scene. As an afterthought, he picked up a pocket knife that had belonged to his father, a small comfort in an increasingly dangerous situation. The drive to Biscayne Boulevard took him through downtown Miami, where the streets were still busy with Super Bowl revelers making their way home. The address led him to an older commercial building in a part of downtown that was undergoing redevelopment. Several of the surrounding buildings were empty, and construction equipment lined the streets, creating an almost post-apocalyptic atmosphere. As Ethan approached the location, he could see smoke rising from the upper floors, confirming that there was indeed a fire. The building was a 6-story structure that appeared to have been built in the 1960s, with a facade that showed signs of recent renovation work. Emergency vehicles were already on scene, their red and blue lights casting eerie shadows on the surrounding buildings. Engine 7 and Ladder 3 were already positioned when Ethan arrived, their crews working efficiently to establish water supply and position ladders. Captain Martinez from Engine 7 approached Ethan as he stepped out of his truck, his expression showing both relief and concern. "Miller, glad you're here. We've got a working fire on the third floor, but here's the strange part. The building is supposed to be empty. According to the property manager we contacted, it's been vacant for 6 months while they renovate for new tenants. Any sign of occupants? Ethan asked, pulling on his gear and checking his equipment. That's just it. The caller said there were people trapped on the 4th floor, but we haven't seen any signs of life. No cars in the parking area, no lights in any of the windows before the fire started, and no one has come out of the building since we arrived. As Ethan looked up at the burning building, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. In one of the 4th floor windows, barely visible through the smoke, he could see what appeared to be a figure waving for help. But something about the movement seemed wrong. Too mechanical, too repetitive, as if it were being controlled rather than being the desperate gestures of someone in genuine distress. "Captain, I'm going up to check the 4th floor," Ethan announced, knowing that regardless of the circumstances, he couldn't ignore the possibility that someone needed help. "Miller, wait for backup. Let's get a full crew together before anyone goes in. Something about this whole situation feels off." But Ethan was already moving toward the building entrance, his instincts and training overriding his caution. As he entered the smoke-filled stairwell, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a carefully orchestrated trap, but his commitment to saving lives left him no choice but to continue forward into the unknown dangers that awaited him above. The stairwell filled with thick, acrid smoke as Ethan climbed toward the 4th floor, his breathing apparatus working overtime to filter the contaminated air. Each step felt heavier than the last, not just from the physical exertion, but from the growing certainty that he was walking into a trap designed specifically for him. The smoke had an unusual chemical smell that didn't match typical building fires, suggesting accelerants had been used. The building's interior showed signs of recent construction work, with plastic sheeting hanging from the ceiling and construction materials scattered throughout the hallways. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows on the walls, and the sound of his own breathing through the mask seemed amplified in the confined space. When he reached the 4th floor landing, Ethan paused to listen for any sounds of distress or movement. The hallway stretched out before him, illuminated only by the emergency lighting and the orange glow of flames from the floor below. The figure he had seen in the window was nowhere to be found, and the silence was more unsettling than any cry for help would have been. As he moved down the corridor, checking each room methodically, Ethan discovered that the building wasn't as empty as everyone believed. Behind a door marked storage, he found what appeared to be a fully operational office space. The room contained filing cabinets, computers, and stacks of documents. The setup looked temporary, as if someone had been using this space for clandestine meetings or operations that needed to remain hidden from public view. The office was sophisticated, with multiple phone lines, fax machines, and even a small safe in the corner. Maps of Miami-Dade County covered one wall, with various locations marked in red ink. Some of the marked locations Ethan recognized as recent construction sites where his fire department had responded to suspicious incidents. Ethan's flashlight beam fell across a desk covered with photographs and papers that looked remarkably similar to the documents Margaret Thompson had shown him earlier. His heart raced as he realized he had stumbled upon the headquarters of the corruption ring that Danny Thompson had been investigating. This wasn't just a random office. It was the nerve center of a criminal organization that had infiltrated the highest levels of Miami's government. Using his small camera, Ethan began documenting everything he could see. Financial records showing payments to city officials, construction contracts for projects that had never been completed, and photographs of meetings between politicians and known organized crime figures. The evidence was overwhelming and would be enough to bring down dozens of corrupt officials throughout Miami-Dade County. One particular document caught his attention, a list of names that included several high-ranking police officers, city council members, and even a judge. Next to each name was a dollar amount, presumably representing bribes or payoffs. Ethan's own name appeared on a separate list titled Potential Threats, along with Danny Thompson's name, which had been crossed out in red ink. As he photographed the last set of documents, Ethan heard footsteps in the hallway behind him. The sound was deliberate and unhurried, suggesting that whoever was approaching wasn't concerned about stealth. He quickly pocketed the camera and turned to see two men in business suits standing in the doorway. Neither man was wearing any protective gear, despite the smoke and heat from the fire below, confirming that they had inside knowledge of the building's layout and the fire's progression. "Mr. Miller, we've been looking for you," said the taller of the two men, his voice calm and professional despite the dangerous circumstances. He appeared to be in his 50s, with graying hair and the confident demeanor of someone accustomed to being in control. "You've seen something you shouldn't have, and now we need to have a conversation." Ethan kept his hand near his radio, ready to call for backup, though he suspected the signal might not reach his colleagues outside. "I'm here responding to an emergency call. If you gentlemen need to evacuate, I can help you get to safety." The shorter man laughed, a sound that was chilling in the smoke-filled room. He was younger, perhaps in his 30s, with the build of someone who stayed in excellent physical condition. "There is no emergency, Mr. Miller. We set this fire to get you here, away from your colleagues and witnesses. You see, we know that Margaret Thompson gave you her son's research, and we need to retrieve it." "I don't know what you're talking about," Ethan replied, though he knew his denial was futile. The evidence surrounding him made it clear that these men were well informed about recent events. "Please don't insult our intelligence," the taller man continued, stepping further into the room. "We searched your apartment thoroughly, and when we didn't find what we were looking for, we knew you must have hidden it somewhere else. Mrs. Thompson has been under surveillance since her son's unfortunate accident, and we saw her meeting with you tonight." The shorter man moved to block the doorway, effectively trapping Ethan in the room. "Now you're going to tell us where those documents are, or you're going to have a very unfortunate accident in this fire. Firefighter dies heroically trying to save lives. It would make for very sympathetic headlines." Ethan realized that his radio had been jammed. When he tried to reach his colleagues outside, he received only static. The two men had planned this carefully, using his own dedication to saving lives as a weapon against him. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated his knowledge of building layouts and emergency procedures. "The documents are in a safety deposit box at First National Bank," Ethan lied, hoping to buy himself time while he assessed his options. "I can take you there tomorrow morning when they open." The taller man shook his head, his expression showing disappointment rather than anger. "I'm afraid that won't work, Mr. Miller. You see, you've become too much of a liability. Just like Danny Thompson, you know too much to be allowed to live. The difference is that your death will appear to be a tragic accident in the line of duty." As the man reached inside his jacket, presumably for a weapon, Ethan acted on instinct and years of emergency training. He grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and discharged it directly at both men, filling the room with a dense cloud of chemical suppressant that temporarily blinded them and sent them stumbling backward. Using the confusion to his advantage, Ethan ran toward the window he had seen from the street. The building's fire escape was old but appeared structurally sound, though it would be a dangerous descent with the fire spreading below. As he climbed through the window onto the metal platform, he could hear the two men shouting behind him, their voices filled with anger and frustration. The descent down the fire escape was treacherous, with smoke and heat rising from the floors below, but Ethan's experience and training guided him safely to the ground level. The metal was hot to the touch, and sparks from the fire above rained down around him as he made his way down floor by floor. As soon as his feet touched the pavement, he ran toward the fire trucks where Captain Martinez and the other firefighters were coordinating their response. The scene was controlled chaos, with multiple units working to contain the blaze and prevent it from spreading to adjacent buildings. "Captain, we need to call the police immediately," Ethan gasped, still catching his breath from his escape. "There are 2 armed men in that building, and this fire was set deliberately to lure me here. This whole thing is connected to a corruption investigation." Captain Martinez looked at Ethan with concern and confusion, but the urgency in his voice was unmistakable. "Miller, what the hell is going on? Are you saying this is arson?" "It's bigger than that, Captain. We need federal authorities involved. There's evidence of corruption that goes all the way to the top of city government." Within minutes, police units surrounded the building while firefighters worked to contain the blaze. The 2 men were arrested as they attempted to escape through a rear exit, their expensive suits now torn and stained with smoke. The evidence Ethan had photographed was recovered from the makeshift office, along with additional materials that investigators would spend months analyzing. Over the following weeks, the investigation expanded to include federal authorities from both the FBI and the DEA. The corruption ring that had killed Danny Thompson was systematically dismantled, with arrests occurring in waves as investigators followed the money trail and uncovered the full extent of the criminal network. More than 30 city officials, police officers, and business leaders were arrested and charged with various crimes. ranging from bribery and money laundering to murder and racketeering. The investigation revealed that the group had been operating for over a decade, skimming millions of dollars from city contracts and using violence to silence anyone who threatened to expose them. Margaret Thompson was finally able to find peace, knowing that her son's death had not been in vain and that his investigation had ultimately brought justice to Miami. She attended every court hearing, watching as the people responsible for Danny's murder were brought to trial and convicted. Ethan returned to his duties at the fire department, but he carried with him the knowledge that sometimes the greatest fires to fight are not the ones that burn buildings, but the ones that burn at the heart of corruption and injustice. He was awarded a commendation for his bravery, though the full details of his actions that night remained classified due to the ongoing investigation. The case became known as the Super Bowl fire conspiracy, a reminder that even on nights when the city celebrated, there were those who worked in the shadows to protect the truth and serve justice. Danny Thompson's articles were posthumously published, and he was awarded a Pulitzer Prize for investigative journalism, ensuring that his dedication to uncovering the truth would be remembered long after the criminals he exposed had been forgotten. Tears to Burtbracher. If you made it this far, thank you so much for following another one of our daily stories. Leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from. We love knowing where our viewers around the world are tuning in from. If this story moved you or made you think, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss any of our narratives that we publish every single day. Until the next video, and remember, the truth always finds a way to come to light,